Hello, my friends, and welcome to Night Whisper. This is a quiet place where we slow down, breathe deeply, and explore the unknown together. Calmly, gently, and without fear. Tonight's story takes us far from noise and light, into snow-covered mountains, patient winds, and a mystery that has been waiting in silence. If these stories bring you comfort, or help you relax and drift a little deeper, you're always welcome to subscribe. It softly supports this channel, and it truly means more than you know. You can leave a gentle like if this story helps you unwind, and feel free to share any thoughts that quietly pass through your mind in the comments. And just out of curiosity, where are you listening from tonight? I love seeing how far these whispers travel. Now, get comfortable. Take a slow breath, and let the night whisper begin. Chapter 1. The Call of the Silent Peaks. Far beyond the reach of cities, where the pale winter sun touched only the tips of endless ridges, the northern Urals rose in quiet majesty. Snow lay thick upon the ground, untouched and heavy, while the wind moved in long, patient sighs, sweeping over the mountains, as if whispering secrets to anyone who cared to listen. There was a stillness here that carried its own weight, and for those who ventured near, the silence seemed almost alive, pressing gently against the ears, filling every gap between thoughts. It was into this hush that 9 young students and their instructor would step, their lives brimming with energy, curiosity, and the subtle thrill of anticipation. Among them was Igor Dyatlov, 23, whose careful eyes missed nothing. He moved through the preparation, like a conductor leading an orchestra, noting supplies, adjusting equipment, considering every possibility. A faint smile often flickered across his face, betraying excitement behind the calm organization. Igor had led expeditions before, but the one ahead promised something different. There was a pull in the air, an invitation carried on the wind, soft but insistent, calling them toward a place untouched by the familiar rhythms of home. It, not with fear, but with that quiet, unshakable curiosity that had led him here and kept him alive in harsher conditions before. Sinaida Kolmogorova, with her mandolin slung over her shoulder, hummed softly as she packed her small bag. Her fingers lingered on each item, as if touching it might allow her to memorize the warmth, the memory, the life it carried. She wrote in her diary with careful loops and strokes, capturing each emotion that bubbled to the surface, not merely observations of the journey or the weather. Her words carried laughter, worry, small regrets, and anticipations of joy. Zina felt deeply the weight of each day, yet she transformed it into something light, like music echoing through the frozen corridors of their train, rides, and bus journeys. Her mind was a tapestry of emotion, stitched together with curiosity for both the landscape and the people she traveled with. Lyudmila Dubinina, shorter and slight, moved with a steady determination that hid her constant awareness of her body's limitations. Past injuries had taught her caution, but they had not taught her hesitation. Every trek, every bend in the river or ridge she climbed, became a lesson in resilience, and her diary brimmed with witty observations, playful banter, and keen insight into the group's moods. Even when the cold gnawed at her fingers and cheeks, she pressed on, eyes bright with engagement, noticing the way the snow caught the low light, how the wind changed tone over the treetops, or how a distant ridge shimmered with frost as if sprinkled with silver dust. Alexander Kalivatov had a different presence, quiet, reserved, yet reliable in a way that anchored the group. He handled compasses and maps, noting trails and landmarks with meticulous care. Each step he took in preparation and travel was measured, deliberate, a quiet counterpoint to the group's laughter and chatter. Alexander's mind often wandered into observations that others missed. A subtle change in the snow's texture, a faint whisper in the wind that hinted at movement far off, or the way the sky shifted, color as the sun fell behind the jagged mountains. His calm focus became a kind of silent reassurance, a promise that no detail would be overlooked. Rustam Slobodin hummed a different tune altogether, a voice and personality that drew people toward him. He was curious about language, music, and the small human details that embroidered daily life. Even in the chill of the train ride north, he would sketch notes in his journal in Mansi, recording words, sounds, and local stories shared by those they met along the way. Rustam's laughter was warm and unhurried, a gentle thread weaving the group together as they moved from city to town to snow-covered path. To Yuri's added rhythm and variation. Yuri Kribonisenko, with a soft grin, used humor as a tool, easing moments of tension and fatigue with a song or joke. His voice sometimes carried into the quiet of the northern forests, bouncing off distant ridges like a secret shared only with the wind. Yuri Doroshenko, younger, athletic, and strong, embodied energy tempered by care. He noticed small details, collected minerals along rivers, and reflected often on home and love. In quiet moments, he would trace patterns in the frost on the tent, or watch the light play across the snow, turning ordinary shapes into fleeting, magical landscapes. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol and Semyon Zolotaryov were anchors of different kinds. Nicolas' practical mind, honed through necessity, allowed him to solve problems in the moment, whether adjusting equipment or fashioning a tool from the snow and wood around them. Semyon, older and a veteran of war, carried experience written in quiet gestures and knowing eyes. His authority was not loud, yet it settled over the group in the way the first snow settles. Unavoidable, soft, but undeniable. Finally, there was Yuri Yudin, whose absence would later cast long shadows over memory. Illness forced him to turn back early, leaving footprints that were the last physical connection to the path the others would take. Though he returned to the world beyond the mountains, his thoughts remained tethered to the journey his friends undertook, his imagination filling in the spaces left empty by distance and time. Preparation for the journey was a dance of meticulousness and chaos. Supplies were checked and rechecked. Maps spread across tables, pencils hovered over notes, the rustle of papers punctuated by laughter and occasional frustration. Socks and gloves were accounted for, boots laced and tested. Yet, in the midst of this practical orchestration, there were reminders of ordinary life, missing items, last-minute adjustments, a song hummed to break tension, a joke that lightened a forgotten task. These moments, small and seemingly mundane, would later appear as sacred memories, proof that life before the mountain was rich and warm, even as cold awaited beyond. From January 23rd, the journey began in earnest. Trains carried the group north, the landscape shifting slowly from urban gray to the muted browns and whites of winter wilderness. Bus rides followed, then trucks, each transition leaving the warmth of human presence behind a little further. Along the way, laughter-filled carriages. Songs echoed down narrow streets of small villages. Locals offered bits of conversation, and the group responded with curiosity, asking questions, noting oddities, learning snippets of Mansi words, smiles exchanged in the frostbitten air. Even the smallest interactions became part of the narrative, threads weaving a tapestry of shared human experience and adventure. By January 28th, Yuri Yudin departed, leaving the others to redistribute gear and adjust expectations. This shift, though small, subtly altered the rhythm of the group. Each person's role became a little clearer. Leadership, humor, care, practicality, all balanced delicately as they approached the deeper wilderness, along rivers like the Lazva and through forests where sunlight fractured into long shards through the pines. Every step felt deliberate, yet dreamlike. Camps rose and fell, fires crackled, and evenings brought diaries, sketches, and songs. The cold bit sharply, but their warmth against it was palpable, the glow of shared accomplishment, camaraderie, and curiosity. On February 1st, they wrote their playful newsletter, The Evening Autortin, imagining snowmen with personalities, winter spirits as neighbors, and the subtle humor of exhaustion. It was a night of levity, of shared stories and imagined adventures, each line of the newsletter carrying the pulse of life itself. In that small flickering light, the future seemed distant, the mountains gentle, and the world still large with possibility. The peaks themselves seemed to watch, a quiet presence in the background of each laugh, each step, each note written in frost or ink. They waited patiently, as mountains always do, neither threatening nor inviting overtly, but carrying the weight of eternity in their silent slopes and wind-swept ridges. It was a call that the hikers would feel without knowing it, an invitation into a space that was at once beautiful, serene, and unknowable. The snow whispered beneath boots, the air seemed to carry anticipation, and in every heart there was the subtle awareness that something extraordinary lay ahead, hidden beneath the calm white silence. And so they moved forward together, each carrying not just gear, but hope, curiosity, and the quiet courage that binds friends into something larger than themselves. Each step, each moment, each shared glance through the cold, pale light became part of the tapestry of memory that would linger long after the journey's end. The peaks waited, patient and eternal, while the young explorers stepped into the hush, unaware of the mysteries the snow and wind held, unaware of the stories the mountain itself was about to inscribe in silence. The mountain watched, patient and indifferent, as their footprints traced the first lines of a story that would ripple far beyond the snow. Chapter 2: Paths of Friendship and Laughter. The world beyond the last outpost of civilization seemed to stretch endlessly, draped in white, silent and undisturbed. Yet within this vast frozen expanse, the hikers carried a warmth that no winter wind could diminish. Their laughter echoed faintly over snow-laden ridges, mingling with the soft whistle of air over frozen streams. Here, and the spaces between trees and along winding paths, friendships deepened not through grand gestures, but through the quiet intimacy of shared steps, shared struggles, and shared discoveries. From the first day on the trail, patterns emerged in the group. Igor Dyatlov, ever observant, moved methodically, ensuring packs were balanced and paths chosen wisely. Yet even he could not resist moments of gentle mischief, teasing a companion about a dropped glove or a forgotten notebook, his smile bright against the frost. Zinaida, strumming her mandolin as they rested beside a stream, responded with laughter that carried long and high, a sound both familiar and comforting. Each song seemed to chase away the cold, weaving invisible threads of connection among the group. Lyudmila Dubinina, though Smolen's light, brought a spark of persistence and curiosity that could not be contained by the chill. She collected small fragments of stone along the riverbank, examining them closely, noting colors and textures in her diary. Sometimes she would pause, listening, tilting her head to catch a faint bird call or the wind's peculiar hum. When the group teased her about her careful attention to detail, she would retort with playful sarcasm, her eyes glinting with humor. It was this mix of care and playfulness that kept the group balanced, a gentle reminder that every detail, no matter how small, mattered. Alexander Kalivatov moved like a silent guardian, observing and recording. Compasses and maps were his constant companions, yet his attention often drifted beyond the tools. He noticed the subtle bending of a pine branch under frost, the faint ripple of ice beneath the snow, the way shadows fell differently at noon than they had at morning. These observations were not made out of fear, but out of an innate need to understand the environment. Even as they laughed and sang, Alexander's eyes held quiet calculations, ensuring that no step was wasted and no path misjudged. Rustam Slobodin thrived on human connections. He engaged strangers in small villages with genuine curiosity, asking about local customs, trading words in Mansi, and recording sounds in his journal with careful attention. Each new word, each story, each smile became a bridge between the hikers and the land they passed through. His laughter was a soothing constant, a rhythmic pulse that moved through campfires, tents, and frozen streams, binding the group together in invisible threads of camaraderie. The two, Yuri Skrivanashenko and Doroshenko, added layers of balance and mirth. Yuri Kribonishenko, his humor often caught the group off guard. He would break into song unexpectedly, strumming a few chords, his voice carrying across frozen valleys. In those moments, even the wind seemed to pause, as though listening. Doroshenko, athletic and keenly aware of the landscape, would wander slightly ahead, pausing to examine patterns in the ice or the shapes carved by snowdrifts. He would return with excited commentary, sharing his observations with animated gestures. Eyes sparkling in the reflected light of the pale winter sun. Nikolai Thibobrignol and Semyon Zolotaryov carried the wisdom of practicality and experience. Nikolai's hands were steady, crafting tools and adjusting equipment with an innate ease. He noticed problems before they emerged, suggesting quiet solutions that often went unspoken until immediately acted upon. Semyon, older and more enigmatic, moved deliberately, watching the group's rhythm. His eyes, trained through experience and hardship, missed nothing. Occasionally, he would offer a quiet correction, a subtle shift of pace, or a soft warning about the dangers hidden in snow-draped slopes. His presence, though understated, lent a silent gravity to the group's exuberance. Their days passed in cycles of motion and pause. The crunch of snow beneath boots, the hiss of ice cracking in shallow rivers, and the occasional snap of a branch created a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the land itself. Even in these repetitions, there was novelty. Patterns in frost, variations in wind, the distant shimmer of sunlight on ridges, each day revealing something previously unnoticed. By engaging with these small wonders, the hikers developed a nuanced understanding of their environment, learning to interpret subtle signs that often foretold changes in weather or the presence of wildlife. The evenings became a sanctuary for reflection. In the soft glow of campfires, they wrote in diaries, sketching landscapes, noting emotions, and capturing fleeting moments. Laughter often punctuated the quiet writing, spilling into night like warm light spilling over snow. These journals were not mere records. They were living maps of thought and feeling, each entry a delicate bridge between external observation and internal reflection. Stories about home, ambitions, small romances, and philosophical musings threaded through their words, weaving a tapestry of human experience against the backdrop of the stark, indifferent mountains. Yet, even amidst laughter and music, there were moments of subtle tension. The wind would rise unexpectedly, sweeping through the campsite with a hollow, almost vocal sound. Shadows shifted oddly across the snow, stretching longer than they ought to, as if the mountain itself was experimenting with form. On rare occasions, a distant echo would carry faintly, indistinguishable from voices, yet clearly too patterned to be purely random. These phenomena were noted, not with fear, but with curiosity, a reminder that the wilderness held its own mysteries, patiently awaiting discovery. They also shared small challenges, moments that tested cooperation and ingenuity. One day, a sled full of supplies tipped into a shallow, icy stream. Immediately, hands reached out, laughter giving way to coordinated effort, retrieving items with care and ingenuity. Another day, the trail became obstructed by fallen trees, forcing improvisation. These moments, though minor, were crucibles for trust and teamwork, allowing each hiker to reveal both practical skill and personal character. In the frostbitten landscape, the bonds formed in such moments grew stronger than any tent, rope, or packed gear. Interactions with locals added texture to the journey. Villagers, curious about these young explorers, offered food, directions, and small stories. In return, the hikers asked questions, noted peculiarities, and sometimes sang songs in exchange for warmth and companionship. Rustam's curiosity about the Mansi language and culture often led to the group collecting snippets of folk tales, song fragments, or the nuanced inflections of native speech. These exchanges, simple as they seemed, allowed the hikers to connect with the land in ways deeper than navigation or survival. They were slowly mapping not just terrain, but the living memory of a place. Through each moment of preparation, each campfire song, and each careful observation, the hikers developed a rhythm that balanced laughter, labor, and reflection. There was a calm excitement in the air, a sense that every step carried them closer to discovery. Even if the nature of that discovery was still undefined, they did not yet know that the mountain's quiet call had a subtle voice, that each ridge and hollow would test them in ways both tangible and elusive. But the soft, patient wind and the shifting light over the snow hinted at something larger, something almost imperceptible, waiting patiently for attention. Even as they joked, sang, and trudged through fresh snow, there was a growing awareness, barely their feeling, that the land itself was attentive, as if the mountain observed their care, their joy, and their respect. A footfall on frozen ground became a note, in a symphony composed by frost and wind. Each conversation, glance, and shared laugh was recorded in memory like a faint, glowing imprint in the cold. The mountain stands, patient and silent, seemed to encourage reflection, inviting them to notice, to wonder, and to become part of its quiet, eternal story. As days passed, their personal journals became treasure troves of thought and imagination. Zinaida wrote about the way light fractured through snow-laden branches, creating fleeting constellations on the forest floor. Ludmila sketched the delicate patterns of ice on river surfaces, noting the way water flowed beneath, the frozen sheen as if moving between two worlds. Igor's notes captured careful observations about wind patterns and snow density. Yet sprinkled between these practical entries were reflections on the shared humanity of his companions. He marveled quietly at their resilience, their laughter, their capacity for wonder in a world often harsh and unforgiving. In these moments of pause, curiosity thrived. The hikers examined snowdrifts for signs of animal tracks, noting the subtle indentations that suggested movement, presence, and life. They observed clouds and shadows, guessing the patterns of storms or the paths of sunlight through the day. They experimented with musical echoes, throwing voices across frozen valleys, listening as the notes returned altered, stretched, or muted. A gentle lesson in acoustics delivered by nature itself. Every sensation, every interaction, every small discovery became a thread in the tapestry of experience, delicate yet enduring. And yet, underlying all this warmth and connection was the quiet weight of anticipation. The mountains, still and watchful, hinted that there were secrets here not yet revealed, mysteries embedded in ice and rock, waiting patiently. The hikers did not sense danger, not in the fearful sense, but in the subtle, magnetic pull that made them pause, listen, and look more closely. The world seemed larger, more intricate than any map or compass could capture, and it was in this gentle wonder, in this deliberate noticing, that their bond with the mountains deepened. By the end of this chapter in their journey, the group had achieved a rhythm, motion and pause, laughter and reflection, curiosity and learning. Each member contributed a unique thread to the growing tapestry of experience. The mountains listened. The wind whispered, and in the spaces between steps, songs, and sketches, the hikers glimpsed something extraordinary. The quiet power of presence, the gentle unfolding of discovery, and the almost imperceptible magic that emerges when human hearts align with the pulse of the world. The trail stretched onward, white and unbroken, inviting them further into the hush of the mountains and the quiet secrets that waited beyond each bend. Chapter 3. The Mountain Breath. The morning light filtered softly through low clouds, dusting the frozen landscape with a pale silver glow. The hikers stirred in their tents, breathing in the crisp air, their movements gentle yet purposeful. Each breath seemed to mingle with the mountains themselves, a subtle rhythm of life against the immensity of snow and rock. There was no hurry, no distant noise of civilization, only the quiet alignment of human and environment. In these moments, the world felt suspended, poised delicately between sleep and awakening, silence and the faint murmur of discovery. Their route led them higher, along winding ridges that sloped gently and then steepened into ridges with sharp, clean edges. The snow underfoot had shifted overnight, creating soft undulations that sparkled, like scattered glass in the early light. Each step was careful, measured. Yet there was a sense of eagerness, of anticipation barely held in check. They spoke little, letting the wind, the trees, and the crunch of frozen ground carry conversation in subtle gestures and shared glances. Sometimes, a chuckle or a song would ripple across the ridge, its echo lingering for moments before dissolving into the mountain's embrace. The peaks, ancient and immovable, seemed to lean in, observing. From a distance, one might imagine them silent and cold. Yet for those moving through their folds, there was a kind of attentive patience, a quiet responsiveness that demanded careful attention. Zinaida stopped often, brushing snow from branches, examining the way sunlight fractured through frozen needles, capturing fleeting patterns in her journal. She would hum softly, letting melody fill the spaces between wind and footfall, as if harmonizing with the pulse of the mountain itself. Ludmila's small hands traced the intricate patterns of ice along the edges of streams, marveling at how the water flowed silently beneath frozen veneers. She would gesture toward her companions, drawing attention to subtle details: a swirl of frost, a glint in the snow, a shadow that moved differently in the wind. It was not mere observation, but a shared invitation to notice, to wonder, to connect. Alexander, always attentive, nodded quietly, marking each nuance on his map, noting wind shifts and the soft footprints of animals that crossed their path, unseen but evident in delicate imprints. Evening fell gently, bringing with it the quiet crackle of fire as they made camp. The light flickered over faces, warming cheeks and hands chilled by the day. Conversations meandered through stories of home, recollections of past expeditions, quiet jokes, and reflections on small marvels discovered that day. Rustam scribbled notes in his journal, sometimes in Mansi, sometimes sketching intricate patterns of frost and bark. Capturing more than the physical environment, he captured feeling, presence, and subtle movement. The mountains listened in silence, the firelight dancing on snow and ice, as though acknowledging each gesture. But beneath this calm, there were hints of unease, almost imperceptible yet undeniable. The wind shifted unpredictably, rising and falling as if testing their presence. Shadows stretched longer than expected, and echoes carried faintly across valleys in ways that made footsteps and voices seem doubled, displaced, as if the mountains themselves were speaking, in a language just beyond comprehension. Igor observed these subtleties with quiet focus, making notes and checking calculations, yet never disturbing the rhythm of the group. His awareness was steady, a soft anchor against a slowly deepening sense of curiosity tinged with caution. The snow began to deepen, falling in soft, feathered waves that muffled the landscape, making familiar paths seem unfamiliar. The hikers adapted naturally, adjusting pace and spacing, reading the terrain with careful attention. Footprints laid upon footprints, forming a complex pattern that marked their passage and also recorded a subtle narrative. Careful progress, shared laughter, minor missteps, recovery, and perseverance. The mountain, patient and observing, held every mark, every sound, every flicker of light as a witness to their journey. Their diaries became ever more intimate, recording not only events, but reflections that emerged from the quietude. Zenaidis' entries captured wonder and melancholy, a delicate balance of joy and awareness of life's fleeting moments. Ludmila's notes blended humor, philosophical reflection, and meticulous observation of the natural world. Alexander's maps were filled not just with coordinates, but with the poetry of careful noticing. A bend in the river, a cluster of pine, the slope of a ridge. Rustam's sketches and linguistic notes were quiet, testaments to the human desire to capture fleeting essence of the world around them. As days passed, the mountains seemed to respond to their presence, revealing subtle surprises. A cluster of animal tracks leading to hidden clearings, an unexpected opening in the ridge offering a breathtaking panorama, the faint shimmer of distant ice catching the sun. Each discovery deepened their sense of connection, but also, quietly, reminded them of their smallness in the vastness of the landscape. The experience was immersive, intimate, and humbling. It asked them to notice, not just with their eyes, but with patience, reflection, and shared attention. There were also moments of challenge, gentle tests of skill and cohesion. A steep bank of snow required careful traversal. A fallen log blocked their path, requiring cooperation and ingenuity. They discovered subtle variations in wind patterns that hinted at deeper snowdrifts or concealed ice. Each challenge demanded calm, deliberate action, teaching lessons in patience, trust, and the subtle intelligence of teamwork. Even laughter became a form of resilience, a shared language to dissipate tension and reaffirm the warmth of companionship. Nightfall brought a different intimacy with the environment. Stars appeared in slow procession, scattered across deep velvet skies, their cold light reflecting softly on snow and ice. The group would sometimes sit silently, noticing the way shadows played across the snow, or the way wind shaped drifts into curves and angles of delicate beauty. At other times, voices carried across valleys, songs or stories that faded into echoes, layering the night with human presence, yet leaving space for the mountain to speak. In these moments, Even silence became an active participant, teaching attentiveness, reflection, and the delicate interweaving of observation and emotion. On particularly clear nights, the wind seemed to shift in patterns that elicited awareness rather than fear. A rustling that hinted at movement, a vibration through the snow that carried both warmth and caution. They noticed these subtleties, recording them in small notations, sharing observations in low voices around the fire. The mountains were neither threatening nor benign. They were patient, demanding attention, revealing themselves incrementally, one subtle sign at a time. Through every trial, every pause, and every quiet observation, the group moved deeper into the mountain's embrace. Their presence was both transient and meaningful, leaving marks of human energy, curiosity, and warmth. In a world that had endured countless winters, footprints in snow, sketches on paper, musical echoes, and whispered conversations became faint, traces of life woven into the eternal stillness of the peaks. Each step, whether across ice, snow, or frozen river, contributed to a growing tapestry of collective experience, shared wonder, and subtle awareness of a larger interconnected landscape. By the third chapter of their journey, the hikers had become inseparable from both each other and the mountains themselves. Every glance, every smile, every careful movement was enriched by familiarity, attention, and mutual care. The landscape shaped them as much as they shaped the rhythm of their days. And yet, with each new ridge crossed, each shadow noticed, each echo captured, there remained a soft, persistent question. What did the mountains truly hold in their patient silence? What stories hidden beneath layers of frost and time waited to be discovered by those who approached with curiosity, respect, and shared courage? In this space of quiet anticipation, the hikers experienced the full spectrum of awareness. Delight in discovery, awe at the beauty surrounding them, reflection upon their own place in the world, and a gentle hum of expectation. They were learning not just to traverse a landscape, but to inhabit it mindful, present, and alive in ways that went beyond ordinary perception. Even as the snow deepened and the wind carried whispers of change, the hikers moved forward, each step a testament to resilience, companionship, and attentive wonder. The mountains had begun to speak to them, softly and patiently, revealing themselves in patterns of frost, light, sound, and shadow. And the hikers, attuned to every nuance, responded in turn with laughter, song, reflection, and careful observation. In this quiet dialogue, they found the first hints of a story, larger than themselves, a story written in snow, wind, and silence, waiting to unfold with patience and careful attention. And so they walked deeper into the white expanse, each footstep a question, each glance an answer whispered back by the mountains themselves. Chapter 4. The Silent Invitation. The sun rose faintly behind a veil of clouds, casting a muted light over the snow-draped ridges. The world seemed hushed, as though holding its breath, and the hikers moved through it with quiet attentiveness, their own voices softened to whispers against the vastness. Each step sank into powdery snow, leaving impressions that marked their journey. It vanished slowly as the wind traced its own patterns over the white canvas. There was a rhythm here, a gentle cadence between motion and stillness, each moment inviting reflection as much as action. The morning began with the careful unrolling of tents, the scraping of frost from fabric, and the subtle exchange of gestures rather than words. Zenaida hummed softly, her mandolin resting nearby, while Ludmila sketched delicate patterns in her notebook, capturing the way snow clung to branches and icicles refracted the pale light. Alexander checked maps and compasses, his eyes scanning for subtle changes in the terrain, while Rustem moved among the group, noting small details in Mansi inscriptions and fragments of local folk knowledge they had gathered. The path ahead led them through narrow valleys, flanked by jagged ridges, each turn revealing both familiar and new landscapes. Snow-laden trees bowed under their weight, creating natural archways, and the wind whispered through needles in a way that seemed almost like speech. The hikers paused often, not from necessity, but from curiosity, taking time to watch the subtle movement of shadows. the flicker of sunlight on frozen streams, or the delicate crystalline patterns forming on pond surfaces. These pauses were not idle, they were acts of participation, of noticing, of attuning to the subtle pulse of the land around them. In these moments, the mountains themselves seemed to extend an invitation, not a loud call or a demand, but a gentle suggestion. Notice the quiet, explore the subtle, attend to the patterns hidden beneath the snow. The hikers responded instinctively, slowing their pace, leaning closer to examine footprints of small animals, tracing the curling shapes of frost with gloved fingers, or listening intently to the faint hum of wind passing through narrow crevices. There was a sense of dialogue, almost imperceptible yet profoundly grounding, a conversation conducted in the language of observation, wonder, and care. Even Igor, usually focused and methodical, allowed himself small deviations from the planned route. He paused to watch how sunlight fractured through a thin layer of ice along a stream, how water beneath seemed to shimmer, like liquid glass frozen in motion. He noted these moments in his diary, not merely as records, but as reflections, small meditations on the interplay between human attention and the subtle beauty of the environment. There was a quiet joy in these observations, a recognition that even in vast, harsh landscapes, there are details that reward patience and attentiveness. As the day unfolded, the group's movements became a soft choreography. Each step, each gesture, seemed to anticipate and respond to the others. Zenaita's laughter, light and melodic, mingled with Rustam's quiet commentary on the land, while Alexander's careful charting of the terrain guided their decisions with a subtle assurance. Ludmila and Nikola would occasionally wander slightly ahead, only to return with small observations. A patch of lichen, an unusual ice formation, a track in the snow that hinted at an unseen creature. Each finding sparked brief discussions, gentle debates, and collective wonder, reinforcing the shared rhythm that bound them together. By mid-afternoon, the hikers reached a gentle slope that offered a broader view of the surrounding peaks. They paused to rest, settling on soft mounds of snow, their breath rising in quiet clouds. From this vantage point, the mountains seemed both immense and intimate, their ridges unfolding like the pages of an ancient, unwritten story. The hikers reflected on the journey so far, their thoughts drifting between anticipation for what lay ahead and appreciation for the subtle beauty that had already unfolded. In these moments, the ordinary act of breathing became a conscious practice, each inhale and exhale connecting them more deeply to the living landscape around them. There were also small, gentle challenges that tested their coordination and presence. A narrow ice-covered ledge demanded careful footing and steady hands. A fallen tree across the trail required improvisation, cooperation, and patience. These moments were never dramatic, but were quietly significant, reinforcing the importance of attentiveness, trust, and collective problem-solving. Even minor missteps, as slipping slightly on ice, dropping a notebook, or misplacing a glove became opportunities for shared laughter and quiet learning, strengthening both skill and camaraderie. As afternoon waned, a subtle shift in the atmosphere hinted at change. The wind carried a different tone, higher and more insistent, brushing across the slopes with a faint resonance. Shadows lengthened, stretching and curling along ridges and valleys in ways that seemed almost purposeful. The hikers noticed these alterations, not with fear, but with heightened awareness. Subtle signs patterns in snow, movement of branches, distant echoes were recorded, discussed, and absorbed, each serving as both practical information and as quiet lessons in mindfulness. Evening arrived with the slow settling of light, a gentle fading that transformed the landscape into a soft tableau of pale grays and blues. Campfires were lit, their flames dancing lightly, casting warm, flickering illumination over faces and gear. Conversations wound through soft observations and shared reflections, the rhythm of the group a gentle counterpoint to the settling dark. Zenaida played her mandolin, not for performance, but to harmonize with the natural silence, while Ludmila continued sketching the patterns created by frost on tent flaps and branches. Each moment was infused with attention, care, and a quiet sense of belonging within a vast, enduring environment. Night deepened, bringing with it a sense of heightened perception. Stars began to emerge, tiny pinpoints of light scattered across the deepening sky, their reflections soft on snow and ice. The wind whispered differently now, moving in patterns that hinted at subtle shifts in the snowpack and terrain. Igor and Alexander noted these changes with calm focus, sharing observations in hushed tones. Even minor details, a shift in air pressure, a faint vibration through the frozen ground, the irregular pattern of falling snow were acknowledged, recorded, and quietly considered. Through all of this, the hikers developed an intimate relationship with the mountains. They were attuned not only to physical terrain, but also to its quiet messages. The gentle encouragement in a clear path, the caution in a hidden drift, the invitation in a subtle glimmer of frost. They had begun to understand that exploration was not merely movement, but a careful dialogue with the environment, a patient unfolding of presence, attention, and responsiveness. Every glance, gesture, and observation became part of a larger story, one written not in words alone, but in the interplay between human curiosity and the mountain's subtle signals. By the end of this chapter, the group had moved beyond mere passage. Through snow and ridge, they had entered a rhythm that was both external and internal, attuned to each other and to the land. Laughter, song, observation, and reflection wove together into a delicate tapestry, making the day feel both expansive and intimate. The mountains, patient and observing, had begun to reveal themselves in subtle ways, teaching quiet lessons about attention, cooperation, and the intricate beauty of a world that is as much felt as it is seen. And beneath all of this, a subtle, almost imperceptible question lingered. What lay beyond the familiar trails, beyond the patterns they could read, beyond the spaces where snow and shadow met in silent understanding? The mountains held their secrets gently, waiting for those who moved through with curiosity, care, and attentiveness, quietly inviting the hikers on through them, who still notice what is often hidden in plain sight. And as night deepened, the wind shifted softly, carrying whispers of paths yet to be discovered. Chapter 5. The Tent of Secrets. The dawn broke slowly, pale and diffused, spilling across the snowy slopes like powdered silver. A hush lay over the mountains, not complete silence, but a quiet that seemed alive, almost sentient, as if the landscape itself were holding its breath. The hikers stirred in their tents, each movement deliberate and careful, their breath curling in soft clouds that mingled with the faint light filtering through the thin fabric. The wind outside rustled gently, tugging at the tent's edges, producing a subtle, constant murmur, like a reminder that the world beyond the cloth was vast, patient, and observing. Igor peeked out first and vast, their white faces broken only by shadows and the occasional dark silhouette of a ridge. He noted the subtle shifts in snow patterns, the fine textures etched by wind overnight. Zenaida unzipped her sleeping bag slowly, brushing off frost, her eyes lingering on the faint shimmer of ice crystals clinging to the tent's inner walls. She hummed softly, a tune that drifted outward, intertwining with the murmuring wind, almost as if the mountains themselves recognized the melody. The morning ritual was quiet but intentional. Boots were laced carefully, gloves tugged on, packs checked, and maps unrolled and marked. Each movement carried a weight of concentration, a mindfulness, born of both habit and necessity. There was comfort in routine, yet the landscape reminded them that comfort was temporary, and the mountains demanded awareness and respect. Ludmila ran her fingers over the snow-laden branches outside, tracing subtle shifts where a breeze had kissed the needles, noticing the delicate glitter of frost against bark. Alexander bent over a small pool, partially frozen, watching how thin veils of ice shimmered under morning light, and traced their forms in his notebook with a reverent attention, aware that these details spoke to the quiet architecture of the world around them. The group had begun to notice patterns in the wind, shifts in its tone, and the way shadows lengthened in unexpected ways. Rustem whispered about subtle variations he had seen, small deviations from the prior day's observations, and the group leaned in, curious, attentive, each hearing the silent instructions the land offered. Even minor anomalies, the snap of a brittle branch, a snow patch, glinting differently under sunlight, were noted, discussed, and recorded. This attention was not fear. It was fascination, a soft tension that underscored their journey. By mid-morning, the group had packed the main supplies and prepared to continue their ascent. Yet, even in movement, the mountain seemed to speak in hushed tones. Footsteps crunched over snow, but the sound was quickly softened by drifting flurries. Shadows shifted, and at times, the hikers thought they glimpsed shapes in the periphery, fleeting and elusive, always gone when looked at directly. Zenaida paused, squinting at one such shape, her breath catching in a delicate gasp, though the wind claimed it moments later. The tent, still pitched where it had served as shelter, became more than just a refuge. It was a quiet sentinel, a space that had absorbed whispers, laughter, and small conversations. Inside, personal items had gathered traces of individual presence. A scarf neatly folded, notebooks stacked with care, a half-finished sketch tucked into a pocket. These small arrangements spoke to who they were, their routines, their attentiveness, their care for one another, and for the spaces they temporarily inhabited. Every item seemed imbued with traces of thought, memory, and quiet energy. As they resumed their journey, an almost imperceptible unease settled over the group. Not fear, but the sense that the mountains held secrets just beyond comprehension, waiting to be discovered in moments of stillness or when eyes strayed to unexpected patterns. Footsteps led across a ridge, down toward a small ravine, where the snow had softened into gentle slopes, revealing shadows beneath. They paused, collectively attuned to what lay ahead. Alexander bent low, tracing faint markings in the snow, interpreting tracks, rhythms, and impressions left by animals or, perhaps by wind itself. The afternoon brought a stillness that felt heavier than the morning calm. The sky was pale, almost featureless, and the wind whispered in subtle eddies, brushing against faces and clothing. Ludmila noticed how the snow draped across each ridge, forming delicate curves that resembled frozen waves, frozen mid-motion, and she bent down to trace their contours in the soft powder. Rustam followed, sketching the forms in his notebook, capturing the nuances that would otherwise fade into memory. Zenaida wandered a few steps, watching sunlight filter through frost-laden branches, noticing the spectrum of colors refracting in icy prisms, and she pressed the moment into a diary, capturing all without naming it, letting the observation speak for itself. Evenings at the camp brought renewed intimacy with the environment. Fires flickered, throwing warm light against frozen tents and snow-covered ridges. Conversations became soft explorations of both external and internal landscapes. Stories were shared of past hikes, of unexpected discoveries, of minor misadventures, and each anecdote wove human presence into the still expanse surrounding them. Igor and Alexander often exchanged, quiet nods communicating both strategy and unspoken wonder at the way subtle environmental cues informed each decision. Night deepened gradually, the darkness a soft, enveloping curtain rather than a stark absence. Stars emerged one by one, delicate pinpoints scattered across a velvet sky, mirrored faintly on the snow's crystalline surface. Wind carried distant sounds, the faint groan of ice, the subtle snap of branches, but these were soft, almost lyrical, woven into the night's tapestry. Footsteps around the camp became whispers, and the hikers moved in synchrony, each aware of the other and of the fragile harmony of presence and observation. It was during one such night that a faint anomaly caught attention. A shadow, too deliberate to be random, seemed to shift across the snow in a way that defied ordinary explanation. The group paused, collectively alert yet calm, leaning into observation rather than reaction. Zenaida raised a hand toward the fleeting shape, her fingers brushing the air as if tracing an invisible line, while Ludmila tilted her head, noticing subtle differences in snow texture where the shadow passed. Alexander recorded their positions and movements, noting the gentle irregularity in his maps, careful to document without overstatement, letting the observation speak quietly for itself. By the end of this chapter, the tent had become more than shelter. It was a marker, a witness, and a silent repository of presence. It had absorbed laughter, curiosity, and collective reflection, standing quietly amidst the vastness. The group moved onward, carrying both physical and emotional traces, each step intertwined with memory and subtle awareness. In TC space, They began to understand that exploration was as much about noticing the unnoticed as it was about reaching destinations. Each footprint in snow, each sketch, each whispered observation contributed to a growing narrative, rich in subtlety and attentive wonder. The mountains had begun to speak in softer, more deliberate ways. They revealed themselves through texture, light, wind, and pattern, inviting careful attention and reflection. The hikers were learning not merely to traverse a landscape, but to inhabit it, letting their senses, instincts, and shared presence weave an ongoing story with the mountains themselves. It was a story without haste, without spectacle, quietly profound, gently unfolding, and alive with attentive curiosity. And as the wind whispered across the slopes, the hikers pressed onward, guided by patience and the quiet invitation of the mountains. Chapter 6. Footprints in the Frost. The morning arrived pale and deliberate, the kind of light that brushed the landscape in soft washes of silver and pearl. Snow lay thick across the ridges and valleys, undisturbed except for the delicate impressions of the hiker's own passage. Each footprint was a small story, pressed into the cold with careful weight, recording progress and hesitation, the rhythm of bodies and minds, attuned to the quiet patterns of the world. A faint mist hovered over the distant slopes, lending a dreamlike softness, blurring boundaries between ridge and valley, between what was solid and what was fleeting. The hikers emerged from their tents one by one, each absorbed in the subtle choreography of morning. Igor moved first, brushing frost from his pack and kneeling to test the firmness of the snow beneath his boots. The ridge ahead rose in a gentle incline, deceptively calm, and the mountains seemed to breathe beneath their feet, responsive to weight, to pace, to intention. Zinaida lingered, watching sunlight fracture along ice-laden branches, each ray catching a prism of color that shifted with the tiniest movement. She sketched the patterns quickly in her notebook, then paused to hum softly, letting the melody mingle with the whisper of wind across the snow. Ludmila's focus was meticulous, tracing traces of wildlife. Small tracks that spoke of unseen creatures, hares, foxes, perhaps even birds, hidden in the pine canopy. She leaned close to the snow, her fingers just above the surface, feeling the subtle impressions and noting their direction, depth, and spacing. In this attention, she captured both movement and intention, learning from the environment as it revealed itself in quiet, patient lessons. Alexander followed, mapping the terrain, noting wind patterns, slight depressions in snow that suggested hidden drifts, and the subtle interplay of light and shadow that hinted at underlying terrain variations. Every detail mattered, each a brushstroke in the larger, living canvas of the mountains. The hikers moved in a rhythm that balanced curiosity and caution. Steps were measured. Hands occasionally brushed against branches or snow, creating micro-conversations between human presence and the environment. The wind was unpredictable, sometimes gusting sharply through narrow valleys, then dropping into near silence, carrying subtle scents of pine, frost, and distant rock. Rustem paused frequently, jotting down notes in Mansi, capturing the ethereal patterns, small linguistic curiosities, and fragments of local observation that added depth to their understanding of the mountain's hidden stories. By midday, the trail led them across a small plateau overlooking a wide ravine, where snow shimmered like liquid glass under the weak sunlight. Here, the hikers paused, not merely to rest, but to notice the faint imprints of branches in snow, the delicate layering of frost over rocks, the way sunlight refracted through ice crystals forming intricate lattice along exposed ridges. Every detail was a dialogue, every gesture a reply, a quiet conversation with a landscape that was patient, observant, and infinitely nuanced. In these moments, subtle questions surfaced. How had wind sculpted this snow into shapes both familiar and unfamiliar? Which tracks were human? Which belonged to creatures that moved unseen? Could the smallest shift in light, shadow, or pattern reveal new paths or hidden dangers? These questions were not alarming, they were invitations. Gentle prods toward awareness, engagement, and understanding. Zinaida and Ludmila exchanged soft glances, their smiles acknowledging the thrill of quiet discovery, the satisfaction of noticing what often goes unnoticed. The day advanced, bringing gentle challenges. A ridge that appeared shallow from a distance required careful negotiation. Hidden patches of ice tested balance and attentiveness. Yet even these moments carried their own quiet poetry. Every careful placement of a boot, every brush against a branch or snowbank, became a subtle negotiation with the mountain. Mist swirled low along the edges of the slopes, shifting light into delicate gradients of gray and white, offering fleeting glimpses of unexpected forms. Rustem paused to trace these, his pencil moving quickly over paper, capturing the ephemeral dance between ice, snow, and shadow. By late afternoon, the hikers found a small, sheltered glade where snow had formed gentle undulations, like frozen waves. Here, they stopped again, unpacking small supplies, sharing quiet food, and observing the environment with a calm reverence. Igor consulted maps and compasses, noting subtle deviations and planned route caused by hidden drifts and wind shifts. Conversations were hushed, punctuated with laughter at small discoveries, patterns in snow that resembled delicate lattice work, unexpected animal tracks, or fleeting reflections in ice crystals. Each observation deepened both practical understanding and emotional engagement with the environment. As evening fell, shadows stretched, curling along the slopes in ways that hinted at hidden depths and subtle shifts in terrain. The wind carried new murmurs, soft but insistent, like a whisper through hollow ice and pine. The hikers paused to listen, leaning into these faint signals, translating observation into awareness. Zineda's mandolin rose in a brief, soft cadence, harmonizing with the rhythm of the wind, while Ludmila sketched patterns revealed in the dimming light. Even in subtle changes, there was a sense of continuity, of connection, a layering of human perception and natural rhythm. Night deepened, bringing with it a profound stillness. Stars emerged one by one, delicate points of light scattered across the velvety expanse above, mirrored faintly in the snow below. Shadows became fluid, shifting as moonlight touched the ridges. The hikers moved slowly around camp, footsteps barely audible, their presence integrated seamlessly into the surrounding quiet. Conversations were minimal, replaced by gentle gestures, the exchange of observations, and the shared understanding that attention itself was both protection and participation. In these hours, the mountains revealed lessons in patience. Subtle patterns in snow indicated hidden slopes, delicate shifts in wind hinted at unseen drifts, and the faint echo of distant rocks settling reminded the hikers of the terrain's dynamism. Every small observation was catalogued, discussed, or quietly noted, contributing to a growing, shared awareness. The group understood that survival was not just about endurance, it was about attentiveness, curiosity, and the gentle practice of noticing what might otherwise slip by unnoticed. By the end of the day, the hikers had traced hundreds of small details, each a story in itself. Every footprint pressed into snow, every frost pattern sketched, every fleeting shadow observed became part of an ongoing narrative, linking human presence to the vast, patient landscape. The tent, packed and stowed carefully, bore silent witness to their journey. It had sheltered warmth, laughter, reflection, and observation, standing quietly as a marker of continuity amidst the shifting world. And through it all, a quiet anticipation persisted. What would the next ridge reveal? Which hidden paths awaited, subtly hinted at by the wind and snow? What stories lingered in the silence, waiting for eyes and minds attuned to notice them? The mountains offered no rush, no harsh lessons, only patient disclosure to those willing to observe, reflect, and move with gentle attentiveness. The hikers understood, in their quiet way, that the journey was both external and internal. Each snowflake, each footprint, each shifting shadow was a guide, a teacher, a whisper of insight. The landscape asked not for conquest, but for respect, care, and the patient practice of presence. In listening, observing, and responding, the hikers became participants in a slow, unfolding narrative, one written across snow and ice, light and shadow, silence and breath. And so they followed the footprints, not just of themselves, but of wonder left behind in frost, moving gently toward the next revelation. Chapter 7. Whispers of the Wind. The sky above stretched pale and endless, a delicate canvas brushed with soft strokes of silver and gray. The mountains exhaled in quiet currents, and the wind carried subtle messages across ridges and valleys, almost like a secret language. The hikers paused at the crest of a gentle slope, feeling the current brush against their cheeks and hearing the faint echo of its passage through distant pine trees. Each gust seemed deliberate, as though the mountains themselves were nudging them forward, inviting closer attention to what lay ahead. Igor led the way with steady, unhurried steps, his gaze sweeping across the slopes, reading subtle cues in snow and ice. The group followed, senses attuned to every shift in light, texture, and sound. Zenaita's eyes flicked to the glimmering edges of frozen streams, capturing reflections in her mind's eye and occasionally sketching them in the corner of her notebook. Ludmila paused, crouching to examine an intricate frost pattern on a branch, tracing its curves with gloved fingers, marveling at the delicacy formed from cold and moisture alone. Each observation became a silent conversation with the world around them, a dialogue in which curiosity was both guide and companion. The wind carried not only sound but subtle pressure, brushing against snowdrifts in a way that revealed hidden forms and concealed contours. Rustam noticed a faint ridge, its presence suggested more by the way the air hummed along it than by its visual prominence. He pointed it out softly, and Alexander bent low to trace the slope with his hands, confirming subtle variations in hardness and density of the snow. The group learned quickly to interpret these delicate cues, understanding that the mountain spoke in whispers, not shouts. Mid-morning brought a narrow passage between jagged outcroppings, a space where shadows pooled and light diffused in gentle gradients. The hikers moved in single file, boots compressing snow with careful rhythm, breath rising in clouds that mingled with the soft currents of wind. Zainita hummed, her melody floating like a tether to warmth and familiarity, and even the wind seemed to catch it, carrying echoes further down the slope. In this harmony, every step became an act of both observation and connection, a subtle interplay between human presence and mountain silence. As they descended into a shallow valley, the wind shifted, drawing attention to subtle changes in terrain. Snow had collected in soft mounds along ridges, and in places, the weight caused delicate cracking, a sound almost imperceptible but resonant in the stillness. Igor signaled a pause, and the group crouched, listening. Even the smallest snap or rustle became meaningful, a reminder that attention was as vital as endurance. Footprints were traced carefully, both human and animal, each recorded mentally and in notebooks, creating a mosaic of passage, movement, and subtle interaction with the environment. During a brief stop near a glimmering ice patch, Ludmila observed a series of tiny, irregular depressions along the snow's edge. They were unlike the tracks of any animal she knew, too small for humans, too patterned for randomness. She bent closer, brushing snow aside to examine them, curiosity sharpening her focus. The group gathered, whispering observations and speculations, the air filled with a quiet energy born of collective wonder. Even without knowing the source, they felt the subtle thrill of a clue, of the landscape hinting at stories just beyond comprehension. The afternoon unfolded with gentle challenges that tested perception and patience rather than strength. A shallow ravine revealed a thin layer of ice over soft snow, requiring careful navigation. Every footfall demanded attention, every gloved hand braced against a tree or ridge edge, creating a rhythm that intertwined caution, observation, and curiosity. Zenaida traced the path of sunlight across ice crystals, watching the refracted patterns shift and dissolve with every movement. Alexander mapped these subtle observations, annotating their route with details that went beyond mere coordinates, capturing the feeling of terrain as much as its structure. As dusk approached, shadows lengthened and stretched in unexpected ways, transforming familiar slopes into landscapes of suggestion and nuance. The hikers paused again, noting patterns in snow, slight shifts in wind, and the subtle echo of distant rocks settling. Rustam sketched observations in the fading light, while Ludmila jotted notes that included reflections on both terrain and the quiet interplay of light, shadow, and human presence. Even in the softening light, the mountain's voice remained clear, guiding attention and shaping experience with gentle insistence. The first hints of night brought a profound stillness, deeper than the hush of earlier hours. Stars emerged slowly, subtle points of light scattered across the darkening sky, mirrored faintly in crystalline snow. Footsteps softened further, conversations reduced to whispers, and the hikers became part of the ambient rhythm. Every movement, every gesture, every glance was deliberate, infused with attentiveness that transformed simple actions into acts of awareness and participation. As the group prepared camp for the evening, they felt a subtle shift in wind currents. The gusts seemed to carry a resonance, a quiet vibration that moved through snow, ice, and bone, almost imperceptible yet profoundly grounding. Igor observed this in silence, recording minute changes in snow compaction and sound, while Alexander noted shifts in temperature and air pressure. The hikers sensed patterns, almost like messages, conveyed not in words but in the language of observation, reflection, and careful attention. Night deepened fully, draping the world in a gentle darkness. The wind whispered through trees and rocks, carrying distant echoes that teased attention and curiosity. Zenaita's mandolin rose softly, a thread weaving warmth through the cold, while Ludmila continued sketching, subtle details, branches tipped with frost, the soft gradient of moonlight across snow, the play of shadows against gentle slopes. Every observation became an act of quiet communion, a dialogue in which the hikers learned to inhabit the mountainous rhythm, as fully as the mountain inhabited theirs. And in the silent spaces between wind and snow, between shadow and light, there was the faintest sense of presence, almost like a question waiting to be noticed. The hikers moved through it without haste, absorbing lessons not written in maps or guides, but whispered in ice patterns, in the hum of the wind, in the gentle pressure of snow beneath boots. Every step, every sketch, every breath was a line in an ongoing story, one that intertwined human curiosity with the mountain's subtle, patient narrative. By the end of this chapter, the group had begun to feel the mountains as more than terrain. They were teachers, companions, and quiet guides. The wind carried stories. In its subtle variations, the snow recorded passage and change, and shadows offered hints of paths unseen. The hikers, attentive and deliberate, were participants in a dialogue of observation and presence, a gentle unfolding of awareness that prepared them, unknowingly, for the mysteries that lay ahead. And as darkness settled fully, the wind whispered across ridges, hinting at secrets yet to be traced and understood. Chapter 8. Shadows Among the Pines. The morning arrived not with a sudden brightness, but as a soft, careful unveiling, like a curtain drawn back to reveal a quiet stage. Light fell diffused across the slopes, touching each pine with a subtle glow, tracing the frost along their branches. Snow clung to needles and boughs, in delicate, shifting patterns, capturing tiny fragments of the wind's journey. The hikers moved among these pines with quiet reverence, their boots imprinting small stories in the otherwise untouched expanse, each step deliberate and attentive, as if the forest itself would notice any careless movement. Igor led, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain ahead. The slopes here were gentler but deceptive, and the wind had sculpted the snow into irregular drifts that made familiar paths unpredictable. He paused frequently, bending low to examine subtle markings in snow, noting the texture and weight, listening to how the wind's current whispered across each ridge. It was a language they were learning, a soft, elusive rhythm that required patience and careful attention. Zenaida wandered close to a cluster of pines, her fingers brushing frozen branches. Tiny prisms of ice captured sunlight and scattered it like fragments of a forgotten rainbow. She tilted her head, noticing how shadows stretched and curled across the snow in patterns that shifted imperceptibly as the wind moved. She sketched, wrote, hummed, her awareness flowing outward, creating a delicate web of observation that extended beyond herself to the group and the land around them. Ludmila moved more slowly, focusing on the footprints and impressions left by animals overnight. Small paws had etched brief stories into the snow, evidence of creatures that had lived entirely unseen. In the hush of the forest, she crouched low, tracing their paths and noting the subtle differences in depth and spread. Each observation sparked curiosity, a gentle thrill that rose, not from danger but from recognition, the thrill of discovery in the quiet interplay of life, wind, and snow. The hikers soon entered a small valley where shadows pooled deeply. The trees here were older, their trunks gnarled and twisted, some leaning as if whispering secrets to one another. The sunlight filtered through the branches in soft, fragmented beams, illuminating the snow in shifting patterns that changed with the wind. Rustim paused, noting the delicate contrast between light and shadow, sketching the faint impressions of branches along a drifted slope. It was almost like reading a script, the landscape itself offering stories in subtle gestures rather than words. Midday arrived with a muted warmth. Snowflakes drifted lazily from higher peaks, each one catching light in fleeting flashes, before settling softly on existing layers. The hikers paused to rest, sharing small bites of food, quietly discussing minor discoveries. Alexander measured the depth of a drift, while Igor observed the wind's direction, noticing slight variations in temperature and pressure. Even the smallest details the glint of frost on a rack. The curling of snow along a branch were catalogued with care, forming a layered understanding of the environment. As they moved deeper into the forest, the pines grew denser, casting longer shadows. The wind hummed differently here, filtering through tight clusters of trunks and needles, creating a resonant, almost musical undertone. The hikers paused again, listening. It was not fear but attentiveness that guided them, a mindful awareness of the subtle ways the world could communicate. Zinaida noticed a faint pattern in snow that seemed too deliberate to be random. Ludmila and Rustem bent down to examine it, tracing the forms with gloved fingers. Could these be the tracks of an animal? Or had the wind carved this delicate impression as it shifted and danced across the slope? They didn't know, and perhaps they never would, but that uncertainty itself was a kind of story, a gentle suspense that rippled through the group. By late afternoon, they came upon a small clearing where sunlight struck directly, warming the air just enough to make frost sparkle more vividly. They paused for observation, noting the layering of snow and ice across fallen branches, the subtle curvature of wind-shaped drifts, and the interplay of light and shadow that shifted with the slow motion of the sun. Each hiker took a moment, alone yet connected, to trace these details in their notebooks, to record the impressions they carried in memory. Even the quiet sound of a distant branch snapping under snow was met with careful attention, a note in the ongoing narrative of the forest. The shadows lengthened, stretching over snow like soft ink flowing across paper. A subtle tension accompanied this elongation, not alarm, but a heightened sense of presence. Footsteps became lighter, movements slower and more deliberate. The group's conversation diminished, replaced by soft gestures, shared glances, and the quiet acknowledgement that the forest held more than met the eye. Every rustle, every flicker of movement in the corners of vision demanded gentle attention. Zinaida's mandolin rose once more, a thread weaving warmth and continuity into the hushed expanse, its sound melding seamlessly with the subtle music of wind, snow, and shadow. Night began its slow descent, turning the clearing into a landscape of delicate contrasts. Stars appeared one by one, mirrored faintly in patches of ice that had formed over small streams and pools. The air held the crispness of approaching cold, and the hikers prepared their small camp, arranging the tent, packs, and fire with quiet care. Igor noted the wind's shift as it funneled through the trees, adjusting the tent lines accordingly, while Alexander marked subtle changes in snow depth along the clearing's edge. Every action was both practical and a continuation of observation, a blending of survival and attentive participation in the ongoing dialogue with the landscape. Evening conversations were hushed, leaning toward reflection. Ludmila spoke softly of her observations in the clearing, how shadows and light danced like living forms across snow and ice. Rustem commented on patterns in the frost that reminded him of delicate brushwork in paintings. Zinaida shared snippets of her sketches, small windows into a mind attuned to detail and wonder. Each exchange built a gentle rhythm, a shared intimacy with the forest that went beyond mere survival. It was a connection woven in attentiveness, curiosity, and the quiet acceptance of being small, yet present in a vast, observant world. As darkness deepened, the wind carried faint murmurs through the pines, subtle vibrations that passed along the forest floor and up into branches. The hikers listened, tuning into rhythm and tone, attuned not for danger but for understanding, letting their senses absorb the mountain's stories. Igor noted a shift in snow texture near the tent. Alexander traced a faint depression across a nearby slope, and Zinaida observed the subtle movement of frost glinting in starlight. Each observation was a stitch in a larger tapestry, integrating human presence with the ongoing narrative of wind, snow, and shadow. The night was calm, yet rich with suggestion. Footprints in snow became faint echoes of the day's journey. Shadows cast by the moon stretched across slopes, and the wind continued its gentle, musical conversation with the land. Every detailed placement of a branch, the glimmer of frost, the curl of a snowdrift offered information, invitation, and reflection. The hikers, moving carefully among the trees, felt part of a larger rhythm, participating in a narrative that was slow, patient, and infinitely detailed. By the end of this chapter, the forest had revealed both its beauty and its subtle complexity. The hikers had begun to understand that observation itself was an act of participation, a quiet weaving of human awareness into the natural world. The pines whispered, the shadows shifted, the snow recorded passage, and the wind carried gentle stories across distance and time. In listening, moving, and observing, the group deepened not only their understanding of the landscape, but also of the delicate, patient relationship between presence and perception. And as the night deepened, the pines stood like silent witnesses, guarding the delicate stories etched into snow and shadow. Chapter 9. The mountain holds its secrets. Dawn arrived slowly, as though the mountain itself had decided to linger in the hush between night and day. A pale, opalescent light filtered through the thinning mist, washing the slopes in muted silvers and faint golds. The snow seemed almost alive, holding the memory of the night's wind, the gentle settling of frost, and the lingering shadows of distant ridges. Each footprint from the previous day was still visible, though softened by drifting snow and the subtle shifting of the landscape. The hikers rose quietly, feeling the mountain's unspoken watchfulness pressing gently against them. Igor led, stepping with deliberate attention, his eyes scanning for subtle changes in the terrain. Every ridge, every drifted hollow, carried information, if one knew how to read it. Today, the slope seemed to breathe under their feet, whispering hints of unseen forms beneath layers of snow. Rustem paused to note the texture of frost along a rock ledge, pointing out the delicate fracturing pattern that suggested subtle changes in temperature overnight. It was not only a scientific observation, but a moment of quiet wonder, an awareness of how the mountain's processes unfolded invisibly yet persistently. Zenaida lingered near a grove of larches, her fingers brushing lightly against frozen needles. Tiny ice crystals glinted like scattered jewels, refracting the dawn light into fleeting prisms. She bent close, studying their arrangement and noting how subtle wind currents had sculpted them into a delicate, ever-changing tapestry. Her mandolin rested nearby, strings vibrating faintly in resonance with the winds passing. Even in silence, her presence added a soft rhythm to the unfolding day, a harmony woven from observation, reflection, and gentle creativity. Ludmila's attention was drawn to animal tracks in the snow. Small, irregular impressions suggested a creature moving cautiously through the forest's depths overnight. She crouched low, tracing each step with gloved fingers, noting the direction and depth, imagining the unseen life that had shared this frozen world with them. Her curiosity was quiet but insistent, the kind that transforms every footprint, every shift of light, every subtle change into a story, waiting to be discovered. Alexander joined her, sketching the terrain and marking subtle changes in elevation and wind patterns that would guide their progress. By mid-morning, the hikers reached a narrow passage where the forest thinned, revealing a distant ridge rimmed in ice and shadow. The wind shifted here, rising in gentle pulses that carried faint echoes of distant rocks settling and ice shifting. Igor paused, sensing a rhythm in the mountain's whisper, subtle but insistent, guiding their attention. The group followed his lead, moving with a careful cadence that balanced curiosity with caution, each step a negotiation with the terrain that was both generous and exacting in its lessons. The valley below offered new intrigue. Snow had sculpted gentle undulations, hiding minor slopes and concealed hollows beneath a seemingly smooth surface. Rustem knelt to test the consistency, noting areas of soft compression versus solid, wind-hardened layers. Ludmila observed small fractures forming at the edges of drifts, evidence of underlying pressure and movement. In these details, they found both practical guidance for movement and the subtle thrill of discovery, the mountain revealing small, patience secrets to those who looked closely enough. As afternoon drew on, they found a shallow ravine flanked by slender pines, their needles laden with frost that shimmered faintly in the dimming light. Zenaida traced delicate patterns in the ice along a fallen branch, while Ludmila studied variations in snow density. Igor consulted the map, comparing annotations with the terrain, and Alexander noted the way wind had sculpted minor drifts along ridges, forming hidden passages and small challenges that required careful negotiation. Every detail mattered, each observation expanding both practical knowledge and a sense of intimacy with the environment. In the quiet moments between movement, the hikers began to notice subtle irregularities. A faint depression here, a shadow cast differently there. A shift in wind, resonance they were small, almost imperceptible, yet insistent enough to demand awareness. Zenaida paused, listening to the faint hum that passed over a ridge, a vibration in the snow and air, so slight it could be dismissed. But her intuition urged attention, and the group gathered briefly, exchanging observations in whispers. No alarm, only shared curiosity, and the recognition that the mountain held stories not immediately visible, requiring patience, attention, and respect. Evening came with a soft diffusion of light. The sky took on muted hues of violet and silver, stretching across distant peaks and reflecting off snow with a gentle glow. Shadows deepened slowly, folding around trees and ridges like ink poured over crystal. The hikers prepared camp with deliberate calm, adjusting tents, checking lines, and arranging small supplies. The wind carried faint, irregular pulses that resonated through the snow and branches, almost like an unspoken message. Igor observed these patterns quietly, noting subtle variations in the way the snow settled with each gust. Night descended fully, unveiling a sky scattered with stars, so delicate they seemed, almost too fragile to exist. The pines whispered softly, moving with the wind, carrying secrets from unseen corners of the forest. Zenita played her mandolin, in measured, slow cadences harmonizing with the mountain's gentle hum. Ludmila sketched shadows and frost patterns by the dim light of a small lantern, capturing forms that would vanish with the rising moon. Alexander measured subtle slopes and ridges, recording details that were as much about sensation as they were about cartography. The hikers began to understand something profound. The mountain revealed itself in fragments, small and patient, never hurried or complete. Every step, every breath, every moment of attentiveness was part of a dialogue with the terrain. Wind carried hints of unseen shifts. Snow recorded movement both visible and invisible, and shadows suggested hidden depths. Observation became a form of participation, a quiet presence in a landscape that was at once alive, patient, and enigmatic. By the end of the night, a shared realization emerged among them. The mountain's secrets were subtle, patient, and often elusive, revealed only to those willing to slow their pace and attune their senses. Footprints pressed into snow, frost glimmering in starlight, the soft murmur of wind through pines. All were lines in a story written across the landscape. The hikers felt themselves as part of this narrative, small yet fully present, participants in a dialogue of patience, awareness, and quiet discovery. And as they lay beneath the vast expanse of night, listening to the mountain breathe, they understood that some stories are not rushed, that some truths emerge only through careful attention, and that the land itself can hold mysteries with gentle insistence, whispering, always whispering, to those willing to listen. And in the stillness, the mountain seemed to exhale, keeping its deepest secrets just beyond the horizon of sight. Chapter 10. Echoes beneath the snow. The morning arrived wrapped in a soft, muted light, the sun a pale disk, just peeking over distant ridges. Snow shimmered faintly under the subtle illumination, capturing the world in delicate gradients of silver and blue. The hikers moved through this quiet expanse, with measured steps, each boot imprinting a transient story upon the frozen canvas. The air was crisp, carrying not only the scent of pine and ice, but the faint undertone of stillness that seemed to linger even when the wind whispered over ridges and through trees. Igor led, as always, his movements unhurried, yet deliberate. He paused at a shallow slope where the snow had accumulated in soft, deceptive layers, testing the surface with a ski pole. The faint resistance beneath revealed subtle shifts, hidden currents of pressure shaped by unseen forces over countless nights. Rustem knelt, gloved hands brushing across the surface, tracing its contours, feeling its texture as if reading a hidden script written by the mountain itself. Every nuance mattered. What could appear ordinary often carried significance to those attuned enough to perceive it. Zenaida lingered by a grove of birches, their white trunks adorned with frost and delicate lace patterns. Her fingers traced the subtle edges of frozen leaves, marveling at the intricate geometry, the way sunlight played along tiny facets, and the soft crackle of ice under light touch. She hummed quietly, a gentle thread weaving warmth into the cold, a melody that seemed to merge with the whispering wind and shifting snow. Ludmila crouched nearby, her eyes catching faint animal tracks that had emerged overnight, small trails that meandered unpredictably, but hinted at unseen life, moving beneath the still surface. The hikers pressed on into a shallow valley where the snow had settled unevenly, creating ridges and subtle hollows that challenged both balance and perception. Every movement demanded awareness, not only of the immediate terrain but of the stories it held. Shadows of distant trees stretched long across the snow, merging with wind-sculpted drifts and creating patterns that shifted with every subtle shift in light. Alexander sketched the interplay of shadows and texture, while Igor marked observations in his notebook, noting subtle temperature shifts and slight changes in snow density. As the day progressed, the wind began to carry a faint, low hum, almost imperceptible but persistent. Rustem noticed the resonance first, a subtle vibration through the snow that made the surface feel alive underfoot. The hiker slowed, stepping lightly, tuning into this whisper beneath their boots. Could it be the settling of snow, the pressure of ice shifting in hidden layers, or something older, a language of the mountain itself, patiently waiting to be understood by those who observed with care? The thought hung in the air, like a question with no immediate answer, stirring curiosity rather than fear. By afternoon, they reached a clearing where the snow had formed gentle waves across a shallow plateau. The light here was softer, filtered through distant clouds, and each drift carried faint traces of wind-carved patterns. Zenaida paused to examine the smallest ridges, brushing away loose frost to reveal delicate impressions beneath. Vladimir knelt beside her, following the subtle contours with gloved hands, imagining the winds invisible, hand sculpting the snow overnight. The scene was both serene and intricate, an unfolding story written in ice, wind, and quiet persistence. Footsteps led them further into the forest, deeper among pines that whispered faintly in the changing currents. Shadows danced subtly, following the curves of snow drifts and revealing hidden dips and mounds that demanded careful navigation. Igor noted every detail: the slight curvature of a ridge, a delicate fracturing along a frozen branch, the quiet hum that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the terrain. Each observation became a dialogue, a silent communication with a world that had its own rules, patterns, and cadence. Evening approached, bringing with it a gentle gradient of violet and silver across the snow. The hikers paused to set up camp in a small grove where frost-laden branches arched overhead, like a natural canopy. The wind carried whispers that brushed against the trees and snow in patterns that seemed deliberate, almost like a slow, secret conversation. Zenaida's mandolin rose softly, notes weaving through the air, blending with the subtle resonance of the forest and the distant echoes of ice shifting along the slopes. Nightfall brought profound stillness. The stars appeared slowly, each one piercing the dark sky with delicate intensity. Shadows deepened and stretched, forming intricate mosaics across the snow. Ludmila sketched these contrasts, tracing shadowed lines across folds and slopes, while Alexander measured subtle variations in snow depth, noting which drifts held firm and which yielded under gentle pressure. Igor and Rustem checked tents and supplies, moving deliberately, their senses finely tuned to the whispering mountain around them. Within this quiet, the hikers noticed other subtleties. The faint scent of pine resin carried on the wind, the soft groan of settling ice, the distant trickle of water beneath frozen streams. Even the smallest sounds seemed to amplify in significance, each one adding a layer to the unfolding narrative of presence, observation, and patient discovery. It was a world alive in ways that required attentiveness to perceive, and the hikers were increasingly attuned, moving with care, noting patterns, and participating in an unspoken conversation with the terrain. The night deepened further, a velvet cloak over the world, and the mountains seemed to breathe around them. Footprints, frost, snow ridges, and shadows became components of a quiet dialogue, an intricate pattern woven by wind, ice, and time. Soneda's music blended seamlessly into the ambient soundscape, while Ludmila's notes captured shapes and impressions, creating a living record of their experience. Igor reflected silently on the rhythm of the day, noting how the group's movement had become synchronized with the mountain. As subtle cues, a silent understanding forming through shared attention and curiosity. By the time the group settled into their tents for the night, a shared awareness had emerged. The mountain held secrets patiently, revealing only fragments to those who observed closely, patiently, and respectfully. The wind, the snow, and the shadows were all part of a slow, ongoing story. The hikers had become participants in it, not merely travelers, learning to listen, observe, and interpret subtle messages carried in ice and air. Even in sleep, the mountain's presence persisted. Through the quiet hours, currents of wind traced invisible paths over the forest and slopes, shifting snow, carrying distant echoes, and reminding those who rested that this world, though silent to most, was alive with meaning. Each hiker carried fragments of these lessons into dreams, a soft continuation of curiosity and attentive observation that would shape every step of their journey ahead. And as the night deepened, the snow seemed to hum softly, holding the mountain's whispered stories beneath its frozen surface. Chapter 11. Whispers in the Wind. The morning broke with a gentle, pale light that crept across the slopes, touching every ridge and valley in a tender haze. Snow lay in soft, rolling waves, capturing the faint traces of wind from the night before, and the pines, tall and silent, shimmered with frost that glinted in subtle fragments. The hikers moved with quiet precision, each step deliberate, their breaths forming tiny clouds that drifted upward before dissolving into the crisp air. Every sound, every movement seemed amplified in the stillness, and the mountains themselves felt alive, their presence patient and watchful. Igor led once more, his gaze scanning the slopes with meticulous care. Even the smallest change in snow texture, the faintest shift in shadow, caught his attention. He paused frequently, crouching to examine drifts, testing their firmness with a pole, and noting irregularities in depth and structure. There was a rhythm to their movement here, one that required patience and trust in both the terrain and in each other. The forest seemed to respond to their attentiveness, the wind bending softly around the trees, almost as if acknowledging their presence. Zinaida lingered behind a stand of birches, captivated by the delicate patterns of frost that lined each branch. Tiny prisms of ice caught the morning light, scattering it across the snow in fleeting rainbows. She traced them with gloved fingers, feeling their fragile texture, and hummed a quiet tune that mingled seamless with the subtle whisper of the wind. Her mandolin rested nearby, its strings vibrating faintly with the mountain's invisible pulse. She smiled at the thought that, even in the cold and isolation, beauty could still be found in the smallest, most delicate forms. Ludmila examined animal tracks etched into the snow, small and intricate, suggesting creatures that had moved cautiously through the forest during the night. She knelt low, following the paths with her fingers and imagining the tiny lives that had left them. Each track sparked wonder and curiosity, a soft thrill that came not from danger, but from understanding the invisible connections between life, wind, and snow. Alexander joined her, sketching the terrain, marking the subtle rise and fall of ridges and hollows, noting how wind and frost had shaped them into a constantly shifting mosaic. The hikers continued through a narrow valley, where shadows pooled deeply beneath thick pines. The trees here were older, their trunks twisted and gnarled, branches forming delicate arches overhead. Light filtered through the needles in soft, shifting patterns, casting long, intricate shapes on the snow. Rustam paused to capture these fleeting moments in his notebook, noting how the interplay of light and shadow created illusions of movement, patterns that seemed almost alive. The forest had become a storyteller, revealing itself in fragments that demanded careful attention and patient observation. By afternoon, they arrived at a small plateau where the snow lay in gentle, sculpted waves. The wind carried a low, resonant hum, subtle but persistent, vibrating faintly underfoot. Igor motioned for the group to pause, listening as the sound mingled with the creak of ice and the whisper of pine needles. Could it be the settling of snow, shifting ice, or something older and more mysterious? The hikers exchanged quiet glances, curiosity gleaming in their eyes. They didn't need to answer. Simply noticing was enough, a recognition that the world carried messages beyond immediate comprehension. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long violet shadows across the slopes, the group found a sheltered clearing to rest. Frost-laden branches arched overhead, creating a natural canopy that framed the subtle dance of light on snow. Sunita plucked a few tentative notes on her mandolin, each one weaving gently with a low hum of the mountain. Ludmila sketched patterns in the snow, capturing the delicate fractures and undulations that the wind had left behind. Eben Alexander, usually focused on measurements and terrain, paused to admire the shifting interplay of light and texture. The mountain seemed to lean closer, its presence almost tangible in the stillness. Footprints from their morning trek remained crisp, but softened at the edges, and shadows lengthened in slow, hypnotic waves across the snow. Every rustle, every subtle creak of ice, every glimmer of frost became part of the story the mountain was telling. Igor walked slowly among the group, noting changes in the wind's direction, subtle shifts in the snow, and the way light altered perception. It was a constant study, a careful balance between observation, interpretation, and quiet participation. Night approached with a serene inevitability, draping the forest in deep, velvety hues. Stars began to appear, delicate and precise, mirrored faintly on the icy surfaces of small pools and streams. The hikers prepared their camp with gentle care, arranging the tents and checking supplies, all the while aware of the subtle vibrations of wind and snow around them. Restim whispered a comment about the delicate arches of frost on pine needles, and Zenaida responded with a soft hum, letting the note linger in the chilled air, blending with the low, resonant whispers of the forest. The night grew deeper, the mountain's presence unwavering yet patient. The hikers settled into their tents, each carrying a fragment of the day's observations and thought and memory. Footprints, frost patterns, and shifting shadows became threads in a quiet tapestry of experience, each one weaving a story that was both personal and shared. They understood that the mountain revealed itself slowly, patiently, offering fragments to those who observed carefully, those who moved with deliberate attention and a quiet heart. Even in sleep, the mountain's dialogue continued. The wind carried subtle pulses across ridges and through trees. Snow shifted and distant echoes of settling ice reminded them that this world, though silent to most, was alive with meaning. Dreams carried reflections of the day, blending observations with imagination, curiosity with wonder, and attentiveness with gentle awe. By the end of this night, the hikers had learned a profound lesson. Some truths revealed themselves only in fragments, with patience and observation. The mountain's secrets were not hidden to scare or confound, but to invite careful listening, attentiveness, and presence. And as they rested beneath the vast expanse of stars, each felt a deep, silent connection to the world around them, a sense of being part of a larger, patient story that unfolded in whispers, shadows, and snow. And in the quiet of night, the wind seemed to carry gentle echoes of secrets, long held beneath the frozen canopy. Chapter 12. Shadows of Discovery. The morning light seeped slowly across the slopes, painting the snow in shades of pale, lavender and soft gold. Every ridge, every hollow, seemed imbued with a quiet presence, a subtle energy that pressed gently against the senses. The air carried the faint scent of pine, resin, and cold earth, a reminder that even in this frozen expanse, life persisted in delicate, patient forms. The hikers rose cautiously, their movements careful but unhurried, attuned to the rhythm of the mountain that had revealed itself in whispers and fleeting signs over the past days. Igor led the group, with his usual attentiveness, pausing frequently to examine the terrain. Each step seemed to carry a lesson, and every detail mattered. the gentle slope of a snowdrift, the soft crack of ice underfoot, or the minute shifts in the wind's direction. Rustem followed closely, noting subtle variations in texture and elevation, his eyes scanning for the hidden narratives written into the landscape. Even the ordinary abenth branch, a small depression in the snow, could signal something significant if observed with patience. Zenita lingered near a slender grove of firs, captivated by the interplay of light on frost-laden branches. Tiny iced crystals caught the morning sun, scattering delicate, transient rainbows across the snow. She traced their patterns with gloved fingers, marveling at their fleeting beauty, and allowed her mandolin to vibrate softly in response to the wind's gentle pulse. The notes blended seamlessly with the ambient whispers of the mountain, creating a subtle harmony that seemed to echo through the clearing. Ludmila knelt near a ridge, studying faint animal tracks that had emerged overnight. Each tiny impression told a story, a quiet narrative of movement and survival in this harsh environment. She traced the paths carefully, imagining the creatures that had left them, and sharing her observations with Alexander, who marked them in his notebook. Together, they began to see the connections between snow, wind, and life, how the mountain's conditions shaped movement, behavior, and even sound. By midday, the hikers reached a shallow ravine where shadows pooled between ancient pines. The wind shifted unexpectedly here, carrying a faint, low hum that vibrated underfoot and through the branches above. Igor paused, listening intently, as if the mountain itself was attempting to communicate a subtle message. Could it be the settling of snow, a hidden ice formation, or something older, a resonance carried from a place beyond immediate understanding? The hikers exchanged quiet glances, curiosity and attentiveness deepening as they moved forward. The plateau ahead presented new challenges. Snow had sculpted gentle waves across its surface, creating hidden dips and soft ridges that demanded careful navigation. Rustem tested each step, probing the snow with his pole, while Zenita and Ludmila observed the patterns of frost and shadow tracing the mountain's silent stories. Igor consulted the map, cross-referencing with the physical landscape, noting subtle discrepancies and features that revealed themselves only through close attention. The mountain revealed its secrets in fragments, and the hikers learned to listen, observe, and interpret these whispers with patience and humility. As afternoon shadows stretched across the snow, the group discovered an unusual formation, a small overhang of rock, partially concealed by snowdrifts. Its surface bore faint scratches and impressions, as if something had passed here long ago. Ludmila knelt, brushing away snow carefully, revealing patterns that hinted at both natural and human interaction. The hikers paused, collectively holding their breath, sensing that the mountain had offered a rare glimpse into hidden layers of history and presence. It was a moment of quiet awe, a discovery that felt intimate, delicate, and almost sacred. The wind rose in subtle, playful gusts, swirling snow into miniature eddies that danced across the landscape. Igor and Alexander observed how the light shifted across the plateau, revealing subtle textures in the snow that had gone unnoticed in the morning. Footprints from their passage earlier had softened, blending with the natural contours, reminding them that the mountain was continuously changing, continuously writing and rewriting its story. Zenita plucked a few soft notes on her mandolin, the music drifting lightly across the snow, harmonizing with the subtle hum of the wind and the gentle creak of distant ice. By evening they reached a narrow corridor of trees that funneled the wind, creating an almost musical resonance as it passed through branches and frozen hollows. Rustem paused, listening to the low vibrations, noticing how the air seemed to carry both sound and sensation, a subtle echo of the mountain's pulse. The hikers adjusted their pace, moving with care, as if stepping in time with an invisible rhythm, their senses finely attuned to the environment's quiet signals. Night fell slowly, unveiling a sky studded with stars that glittered like scattered diamonds across a dark velvet expanse. The mountain's silence deepened, punctuated only by the faint rustle of trees and the subtle settling of snow. The hikers set up camp in a sheltered nook, arranging tents, checking supplies, and preparing for the long night. Zenita strummed her mandolin softly, Ludmila sketched shadows and frost patterns, and Alexander made careful notes of subtle terrain features. Each action was deliberate, a meditation that mirrored the mountain's slow, exacting pace. The night carried a quiet resonance that seemed to extend beneath the snow, a vibration almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to those attuned to its rhythm. Igor lay awake for a time, listening to these subtle currents, feeling the mountain's presence not as threat, but as a patient guide. Each sound, each movement, each shadow was a lesson in observation, patience, and quiet understanding. The hikers slept lightly, dreams threaded with fragments of the day's discoveries, the mountain's whispers continuing to reach them in soft, persistent waves. As the night deepened, a sense of anticipation lingered, not of fear, but of discovery. The mountain, patient and deliberate, seemed to hold a story that would reveal itself in time, in fragments, to those willing to move slowly, observe carefully, and listen deeply. Footprints, frost, snow ridges, shadows, and light all became components of an ongoing narrative, one that invited the hikers into a dialogue with the land itself. They understood, even in these quiet hours, that every moment of attentiveness and every fragment of observation was part of an unfolding truth, a truth whispered gently through wind and snow. By the end of this night, the hikers felt a deepening connection with the landscape, a sense of being intertwined with its subtle rhythms and patient narratives. Every step, every breath, every note of music or sketch in the snow became part of a shared story between human and mountain, a dialogue of observation, awareness, and quiet wonder. And as they drifted into sleep, the mountain exhaled softly, cradling its secrets beneath the gentle blanket of snow, waiting patiently for tomorrow's attentive eyes. Chapter 13. The Mountain's Last Whisper. The morning dawned pale and fragile, the sunlight a soft, golden veil spilling over the slopes and illuminating every curve of snow and ice. Shadows stretched long and fluid across the ridges, bending and merging, as if reluctant to leave the day behind. The hikers stirred quietly, their movements careful, deliberate, as if acknowledging the mountain's unspoken presence. Every breath they drew seemed to mingle with the cold, crystalline air, carrying a faint resonance of the past day's observations, discoveries, and whispered lessons. Igor led the way, scanning the terrain with unhurried diligence. He traced subtle patterns in the snow, the slight dips and ridges that might reveal hidden channels of wind, or perhaps the subtle shifts left by animals, passing unseen in the dark. Rustam followed, noting the sound of snow settling. Beneath their steps, the faint hum of wind echoing through narrow valleys. There was a rhythm to their movement, a quiet synchronization with the mountain's patient pulse, and each hiker had become attuned to its gentle cadence. Zenaida lingered in a grove of birches, enchanted by frost that clung delicately to the branches. She ran gloved fingers along the crystalline patterns, marveling at the delicate fractals, and hummed a melody that blended seamlessly with a soft whistle of wind through the trees. Her mandolin rested nearby, strings vibrating faintly, as if echoing the mountain's subtle resonance. The scene was both ephemeral and eternal, a fleeting moment frozen in time, yet carrying the weight of discovery and quiet reverence. Ludmila crouched by a cluster of animal tracks, etched into the snow, following their meandering paths with gloved hands. She imagined the small lives that had traversed the frozen landscape overnight, tracing their journeys with curiosity and gentle delight. Alexander noted each pattern meticulously, sketching the subtle depressions, the fragile impressions, and the way sunlight played across them. Together, they began to see a map written in nature's hand, a tapestry of movement, wind, and silent storytelling. The group advanced toward a plateau where snow sculpted itself into intricate waves, shifting in gentle gradients across the frozen surface. The wind carried a faint, resonant hum that vibrated through the snow beneath their boots. Igor paused, listening intently, attuned to the mountain's subtle signals. Could it be the settling of ice, the slow creep of snow down hidden slopes, or something older, a quiet echo of time itself? The hikers exchanged understanding glances, their curiosity deepening rather than their fear, aware that patience was key to unveiling the mountain's secrets. Afternoon light softened further, painting the slopes in muted gold and violet. Shadows stretched across the snow, merging with the contours of ridges and hollows to create ever-shifting mosaics. Rustem and Zenaida paused to observe, tracing the interplay of light and shadow with their eyes and hands. Ludmila crouched low, noting small differences in snow, texture, and frost formation, imagining the forces that had shaped them over countless nights. The mountains spoke in whispers, subtle yet persistent, rewarding attentiveness with fragments of understanding. By evening, the hikers discovered a narrow ravine, partially concealed by snowdrifts. The air here was still, almost sacred, carrying a faint hum that resonated through the frozen landscape. Igor knelt, brushing snow delicately from the rocks, to reveal faint markings etched into the surface. Each line suggested movement, perhaps from something or someone long gone, a reminder that this mountain had witnessed countless stories over time, many of them hidden beneath layers of snow, wind, and shadow. The group paused collectively, absorbing the scene. Every observation, every step, every fragment of trace they uncovered became part of an ongoing dialogue with the mountain. There was no rush, no urgency, only the patient accumulation of insight, woven through attentiveness, curiosity, and quiet reverence. Zenaida plucked soft notes on her mandolin, the music rising like an offering, harmonizing with the subtle whispers of wind, snow, and distant ice. Alexander sketched the patterns in the snow and on rock surfaces. Ludmila catalogued every trace, and Igor noted the interplay of forces in meticulous detail. Nightfall brought profound stillness. The sky unfurled in deep indigo, studded with countless stars that glittered across the expanse like scattered diamonds. The wind softened, drifting through pines and over snowdrifts in gentle, measured currents. The mountain seemed to exhale slowly, enveloping the hikers in its presence, a quiet acknowledgement of their patience and attentiveness. Footprints, frost patterns, and subtle traces of discovery became threads in a story written across the frozen landscape. Delicate and persistent, the hikers settled into their tents, each carrying a sense of completion mixed with anticipation. The lessons of the mountain, its hidden patterns, its quiet resonances, the stories embedded in snow, ice, and wind were now deeply imprinted in their minds. Even in sleep they continued to listen, dreams carrying fragments of the day's discoveries, weaving together curiosity, observation, and wonder. In these final hours beneath the stars, the mountain whispered one last lesson. Some truths are revealed not all at once, but in fragments, patiently, to those willing to observe, listen, and engage with subtlety. Each footprint, each frost pattern, each faint vibration underfoot was a clue, a story, a gentle thread connecting human presence to the broader, enduring life of the mountain. The night deepened, carrying with it the quiet echoes of all that had transpired. The hikers, suspended between wakefulness and dreams, felt the mountain's presence as a slow, patient pulse. It was not a force to fear, but a companion in quiet discovery. A teacher whose lessons unfolded in whispers beneath snow, in patterns of frost, in the subtle resonance of wind and ice. And as dawn approached, casting the first light across ridges and valleys, the hikers rose once more, carrying with them the memory of the mountain's patient guidance. Every step forward would echo the attentiveness, curiosity, and gentle wonder that the frozen slopes had inspired. The mountain had shared its secrets slowly, deliberately, and they had listened, becoming part of a story that spanned time, wind, and snow, a story whispered beneath the quiet canopy of the northern Urals. And as they left the frozen plateau, the mountain remained, holding its secrets patiently beneath a soft blanket of snow, its whispers lingering for those who might one day return to listen. Reflections beneath the silent peaks. The wind falls quiet now, and the mountains stretch in serene, unbroken lines, carrying the weight of time and memory across their frozen slopes. Beneath the snow and ice, beneath the long shadows of pine and fir, the echoes of the hikers' footsteps lingered, not as mere traces of motion, but as gentle imprints of curiosity, courage, and wonder. Each ridge, each hollow, each frost-laden branch holds fragments of their journey, small moments of attentiveness, music, laughter, and reflection, woven into the vast and patient tapestry of the northern Urals. In retracing their path, we come to understand that the Dyatlov Pass was never simply a location marked by tragedy. It was a living, breathing environment, full of subtle stories, complex designs, and hidden rhythms. The mountain spoke in whispers through shifting snow, through frost-cracked branches, through the low hum of wind across ridges, and those who moved with care could begin to hear its language. To the hikers, the mountain offered fragments of insight, lessons in patience, observation, and reverence for the quiet forces shaping their world. Each chapter of their journey revealed something about human vulnerability and resilience. Igor, Sinaida, Lyudmila, Alexander, Rustem, Yuri, Nikolai, and Semyonov carried unique strengths, personalities, and stories. And in their interactions with one another and the mountain, they reflected a harmony of human curiosity and communal trust. Their notebooks, diaries, sketches, and songs became more than documentations. They became vessels of presence, awareness, and delicate wonder. Even Yuri Yudin, who turned back due to illness, became part of the narrative, carrying the memory of shared experiences and quiet discoveries that might otherwise have been lost. As we reflect on the incidents and theories that have swirled around the pass for decades, slab avalanches, infrasound-induced panic military tests, or even more fantastical speculations, we recognize that the mountain does not reveal all of its truths at once. It offers fragments, and it rewards the patient observer. The ambiguity of events, the slow unveiling of evidence, and the subtle interplay of natural forces all point toward a larger lesson. Some mysteries are meant not for immediate explanation, but for reflection, attentive listening, and measured understanding. There is beauty in this deliberate uncertainty, in a world that often demands immediate answers and sensationalized conclusions. The story of the Dyatlov Pass reminds us that calm observation, empathy, and careful reasoning can uncover truths that are quieter but no less profound. It teaches us about human limits and endurance, about the connection between people and the natural world, and about the patience required to appreciate the subtle language of life, wind, and snow. As night settles over the northern Urals once more, stars shimmering faintly over peaks and ridges, we carry forward the echoes of the hiker's journey, their footsteps, their attentiveness, their small acts of wonder, plucking a note on a mandolin, tracing patterns in the snow, sketching frost formations remain with us. These are the whispers beneath the silence, the delicate threads connecting human curiosity to the vastness of nature. And in this quiet reflection, we are reminded that every journey, whether across frozen peaks or through the landscapes of our own heart sleeves, gentle traces, some will be visible, some hidden, but all hold lessons of attentiveness, resilience, and reverent wonder. The Dyatlov Pass endures not simply as a site of mystery, but as a testament to the patient observation of the world, to the quiet courage of those who move with care, and to the enduring resonance of curiosity and discovery. The mountain continues its watch, patient and unhurried. Its secrets are held beneath layers of snow, ice, and shadow, whispered softly for those who listen with quiet hearts. And perhaps, if we pause, breathe, and observe, we too can hear the stories, hidden in the wind, the frost, and the stillness. Stories of courage, of presence, and of the delicate interplay between humanity and the vast silent world it seeks to understand. The mountain sleeps beneath its snowy veil, yet its whispers remain timeless, patient, and endlessly inviting those willing to hear.